Our next session, how we finance climate solutions at scale. Please welcome to our stage Global Director of Public Affairs, Advocacy and Transparency at Ingka Group, IKEA, NELE BOUCHIER.
Hi, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Action Speaks session today. Action Speaks, you might have seen it just outside of this hall. We are presenting to you a platform that really aims to accelerate the implementation of sustainable solutions, climate solutions. We launched the platform last year already, and this year we launched our digital version. And why do we do it? We still have 5 years to reach the Paris Agreement. So what we really need to do now is focus on actions and solutions. We're bringing together real, scalable, tangible solutions that can be implemented right away. And then to reach the Paris Agreement, we also need to really unlock some key enablers like finance and policy. And that is why we are here today and why we invited you. How can we work together to channel more financing to climate solution? Because it's really time to invest now. And thank you for joining. I will now give the word to Claire BAUMANN. She's the head of sustainable finance at UN Global Compact, who will lead this session for us. Go ahead, Claire.
Thank you so much. Well, first of all, I feel very comfortable in these chairs. It's almost like being in the Friends TV show living room, but we need sunglasses, right, Colin? I know we're right before lunch, and I can promise you, we've just been backstage with this group. You are in for a very lively, animated panel. I promised provocative conversations, stories, what's working, what's not working, all things that we're going to discuss today. But first, I'd love for our panelists to introduce themselves, and I'll start with Steve, who told me backstage that you started your career wandering in the woods. So if you could just...
I've had too many chapters in my career to go do the full thing. So no, I am a sort of tree hugger originally. I'm an ecologist by training, and then went through various things in the NGO sector, was in the climate group, went to IKEA. I was CSO at IKEA, so good to be back with friends here. And I'm now with Temasek, which Temasek, for those that you don't know it, is a state-owned investment firm. It's run as a private investment firm out of Singapore, but we basically invest long-term, and the capitals, we care about what we do because it's on behalf of the people of Singapore, and we've really lent into climate and sustainability in the last few years.
Fantastic. And JACOMIJN, you've described yourself as a hardcore banker.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Next to the tree hugger, you have the hardcore banker, indeed. I spent my life professionally mostly at ING, the European bank. We're also active here in the Americas. 17 years on the commercial side, and then 10 years at risk. That's the hardcore part. And since 2 years, I moved to the sustainability world. And it took me quite a while to get used to the overwhelming landscape, which is ESG and what some people call the ESG alphabet soup. But I'm learning, and I'm very happy to be here.
Wonderful. And Colin, I learned that you're Dutch originally, but tell us a little bit about yourself, generation, your story.
Sure, yeah. I'm a co-founder of Generation Investment Management, which is a sustainable investing platform that we set up in 2004. So we've been trying to prove the investment case for sustainable investing in both public and private equity markets. The firm is famous for being founded by Al Gore, so he is our founder and chairman. So the other famous founder is a guy called David Blood, who used to run asset management at Goldman Sachs. So the Blood and Gore name of the firm is the sort of unofficial name of the firm. That is the most recycled joke in history, I've got to say. But
it's still good.
You got some laughs.
Yeah,
got some laughs.
there we go.
Keeping the audience
going. Look forward to this discussion.
Wonderful. So Colin, I'd love to start with you. Can you just give us a little bit, paint the picture of the landscape we're in today with climate finance and sustainable finance? It's a complex world.
Indeed. So look, I think Climate Week has been really sobering to me. Just these last few, it feels like we've been here 3 months, right? But I definitely feel that it's the best of times and the worst of times with climate finance. So on the one hand, we are putting a lot more finance into climate solutions. There is no doubt about that. We're going to break through the 2 trillion number this year, which is a very significant number. And that number, as many of you know, needs to go up to about 5 trillion a year to basically get us to on a 1.5 degree pathway. So we are going in the right direction. The scale needs to obviously go up. The big problem, and where it's the sort of worst of times, is that capital is not going to all the places it needs to go to decarbonize the real economy. So climate finance is flowing to de-risked solutions. So let's say the renewable infrastructure space is very well funded. The climate tech venture capital space is very well funded. The global north is very well funded. But there are other things that need to happen in the world for us to decarbonize the economy. Let's just remember, by 50% by 2030. So heavy industry, the highest emitting, most off-track tech sectors, steel, cement, aviation, shipping. Even the built environment is miles behind on decarbonizing. Then you get into the whole natural climate solutions landscape, and you get into the whole global south. So the finance is not going everywhere it needs to go. So there are structural reasons for that, mainly that the financial community is purely incentivized around financial return. So we have been advocating with many others that impact objectives need to be fully integrated into the capital allocation process to make sure that capital is flowing to where it needs to go to decarbonize the economy. So this is a reality of greenwashing. This is a reality of non-additional impact that is basically characterizes, I would say, 90% of climate finance today. So the finance community is very good at telling other industries to innovate. We tell the energy companies to innovate. We tell the car companies to innovate. We need to innovate.
Right.
Finance needs to change how it does business to allocate capital to high impact, because we are not decarbonizing anywhere quickly enough, and that is because of structural issues in the climate finance community. There are no shortage of projects, entrepreneurs, amazing solutions to invest in. Absolutely not. There is a bottleneck in asset management because of structural reasons and in the banking sector, which we'll talk about.
JACOMIJN, let's enter banking. Can you tell us a little bit more about the complications within your own sector and why it might be hard to move as fast as we want to go on climate finance?
And I do recognize a lot of what Colin has just pointed out, that we need to go faster, and we also need to be able to finance those like newer technologies, riskier technologies that are essential to make the transition. But I think the fundamental complexity is that we talk about trillions in financing needs, and they are out there, but not every financing need is a financing opportunity. And if it is a financing opportunity, you need to layer it. So ING is a commercial bank. We'd like to stretch our risk appetite as far as we can, but there are limitations how far you can stretch it. So we need to find the collaboration between the commercial banks, the more riskier fund providers, more government-related fund providers, to make it work and to create some part of de-risking. Because we have a risk appetite that we can't just completely walk away from. The other part is we steer our portfolio on the sectors like just described, like steel, shipping, transportation. We steer how they are aligned to net zero. You could argue we could go faster, but we also spend a lot of time on advocacy. We spend a lot of time in working groups to make sure there are Poseidon principles, which apply to shipping, green steel principles, which actually have led to the first green steel plant in Europe, H2 Green Steel. So things take time, and that's very frustrating if you want to make change, but you need to be able to continue to do your more business as usual, and as a commercial bank, we try to facilitate the business as unusual as well.
Steve, I see the wheels turning in your head as you listen. What do you agree? Are we moving fast enough? Can we move faster? what's working, what's not working, and what's scalable?
I mean, I think we've heard some good comments on that already. I mean, it's clear, on some levels, it's super exciting. There's massive amounts of, if you look at the pace of deployment of solar, it's incredible.
Yeah.
If you go back 20 years ago, we had, I think, 4 gigawatts of solar was cumulatively installed. So it had taken 50 years to get to 4 gigawatts. We do that amount every 4 days now.
Amazing.
So yay, that's great. But
you're like, we need in the audience.
Yeah, but then relative to are we decarbonising fast enough? No, we're not. So in the race of our lives against climate change, we're a little bit losing the race, and we need to really increase capital flows. And I'll just frame it slightly different. You framed it really well, Colin, but I'll just maybe try and explain it differently. So if you're an investor, you've got 2 things to do, basically. You're trying to understand the risk of an investment and then allocate capital. So you're finding good projects, good companies to deploy, to invest in or to loan money to, and you're trying to understand risk. The more risky things are, the more returns, the more expensive that money is, the more returns you want from it. So we've got things like, we've talked about renewables, electric vehicles, battery storage. There's lots of things now. The technology is super low risk. There's no technology risk there. The policies are well established in the north, like you said, Colin. So there's lots of money flowing in there because it's low risk. You can understand the returns, so money flows in. As soon as you move into higher risk countries where there's currency risk, there's risks of defaults, into parts of the global south, there's very, very little capital. And the worst thing is then the capital that does go there is, unless it's concessionary in some way, tends to be very expensive. So the countries that can least afford that get the highest priced capital. So it's really expensive to do stuff. That's the thing, that's the biggest challenge. And if you look, we've partnered deeply and we've invested in the firm Leapfrog. I'm on the leadership council. They're a long-term impact investor. So originally they're focused on how do we roll out financial services and healthcare to the underserved. So the underserved, people living, the average Leapfrog portfolio company customer, so somebody in sub-Saharan Africa or wherever, or in India, will be on $12 a day or less. They've reached 500 million people now, and we're now rolling out a climate fund, and it's hard to raise money for this sector. It is, and we've committed $100 million behind that, and some others have come alongside us. Some of the direct finance institutions have come alongside us. There are great businesses. The thing that's exciting, to go back to the good technology, is we've had lots of talk about the green premium, and we're now in the era of the green discount. So solar, if you're in sub-Saharan Africa or in South Asia, abundant sun, most of those places, solar with storage is your cheapest option to get energy access if you don't have energy access. But this capital is expensive, so you need to adapt business models. But people have been doing that in other things like financial services with microfinance. So there's companies like Sun King, which is pay-as-you-go solar. So you don't have to outlay for this, but you actually can do pay-as-you-go. It's cheaper than the kerosene you were buying that was bad for air quality and that was messy. And you've suddenly got really reliable access to energy on a large scale. 100 million people have access to that now. So I think what we need is, we need asset owners like ourselves, pension funds, the people that you deal with, high net worth individuals. We need people to lean in and look at how do we accelerate the deployment of capital. Because there's a sort of human case. It's about access to mobility, essential services for 5 billion people.
Right.
And it's also about preventing future growth of emissions. And that's the area of biggest concern to me. That's where we massively need to increase the amount of capital deployment.
And Colin, jump in here.
Yeah, could I just build on what Steve's saying? I agree with everything he said. I mean, I think Temasek has really been a leader in innovating how capital flows into climate solutions. So I just really want to applaud Temasek's work. The thing I think we often don't talk enough about is stopping finance that is high carbon. So at the moment, the market as a whole is voting for a high carbon future. So every day with your dollars in your pension fund, every day with your dollars in your consumer behavior, every day in your institutions that you're working with, you are voting for a future. And at the moment, 95% of the market is voting for a 3-degree world. And so we've got to stop doing the bad stuff and also keep doing the good stuff. So we talk a lot about, well, we need to scale climate solutions. Absolutely. We need to scale down anti-climate finance. Fossil fuel subsidies is top of that list. Okay, they get 11 trillion a year to prop up the fossil fuel industry. Understandable in the sense of energy access and bringing down the cost of energy for people who need it. But the reality is the renewable space gets about $1 trillion a year in subsidies. Okay? So the first thing we need to do is stop propping up a high carbon economy. And you can have influence on that with how you direct your pension fund. It really, really matters because it sends a signal. Climate solutions is a very thin slice of the capital market today. There is enough money in the world to solve the climate crisis. It's just in the wrong place. And you can have an influence on that. We can have an influence on that. And it really matters. And the risk-return equation that Steve was talking about is increasingly attractive on an individual asset basis. So individual companies can make you a good return and have impact, but also on a systemic de-risking approach. Because the big pension funds that we work with as clients and the sovereign wealth funds, they are very worried about how climate risk is going to affect their entire portfolio. They are very worried in a 3-degree world that the cost of living is going to be inaccessible for a lot of people. You're not going to be able to get home insurance. Your food's going to be too expensive. You're not going to be able to live in certain geographies. So if you're a pension fund, you think about that long-term liability and what it means in a 1.5-degree world versus a 3-degree world. Yeah. And so your asset liability matching is much tougher in the world we are currently voting for with our dollars. So please stop financing high carbon.
That's the main message. And
I'm waiting.
A round of applause. I like what you're saying about the pension funds because it's long-term assets. People are looking for long-term returns, and we really need, provocatively love to hear to move from short-termism to long-termism and taking the long view. My understanding is I think there's $200 trillion that could be unlocked through pension funds that we could realign. However, when I talk to asset managers, sometimes I hear the firefighters, the teachers, we have to look out for them, and do they necessarily want to invest in renewables in sub-Saharan Africa? So Steve and JACOMIJN, I would wonder what you'd say to that.
Yeah, I mean, we've done, and just to echo what Colin said in a way, but we've done the analysis. So we know, if you look at, there's something called a universal owner. Like if you're a big pension fund or if you're a large asset owner, you're kind of exposed to the total economy. You've kind of got to be. So the best indicator of your long-term returns are not your individual investments, it's does the global economy does well. We know, we've done the analysis, we know the global economy does well when you create just inclusive growth, so we get more people out of poverty into the economy, and when we tackle climate change. Then the economy does well, long-term. So with our exposure to that, we have to invest to create that future. People have hidden behind fiduciary responsibility, thinking somehow that meant they could invest in all the bad stuff because it was giving good short-term returns. Actually, we have to redefine fiduciary responsibility and say, fiduciary responsibility is investing in the future we want, not in the legacy that we don't want. And so we've been really leaning into that, and we put carbon pricing in, carbon budgets for our team. We've set up an energy transition team. We've set 4 new investment vehicles up, about 1 a year in the last 4 years, to try and do that. And then what we now can see, actually, that the future is very different from the past. And it is, we're not going to be having high-polluting fossil fuel businesses raising money on capital markets in a decade or two's time. So it's time for us to get there now. And I think, but there's a reframing that's required. Right. I mean, Colin's been battling at this with the team for 20 years. I mean, you were like a strange beast when you emerged 20 years ago.
Probably still a bit of a strange beast. Yeah.
Strange
Thank
beast.
You. I've never been described as a strange beast, but that's a new one. Love that.
It's something else to add into the blood and gore.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, I want to give you the floor.
Yeah, maybe the banking perspective, because I think, and I sympathize a lot with what Colin has just said, and the financial industry is often criticized for still financing fossil fuels and traditional resources, energy resources, and to some extent rightfully so. At the same time, we finance the real economy, and like Colin pointed out, if we as society vote for fossil fuels, it's impossible to say to banks, you have to completely step away from that, which doesn't mean we don't need to take our responsibility, which is, for instance, why ING is vocal about stopping subsidies for fossil fuels. We take that point of view. But everything needs to go in a transition, you know, it's not black and white. We can't just jump to green from day one to day two. So transition is the buzzword, but transition can also be an excuse to hide behind slow progress. And that's the balancing act we have to make. But it's true, we have to make a choice as society to step away from fossil fuels. And then the marketplace actually will start to support that choice.
And we were talking backstage about the right mix of carrots and sticks. Regulation, Europe leaning in. I think people have been very vocal about the reporting burden, but at the same time, is it pushing us where we need to go? And then also looking at the US recently with the IRA, you know, give us your perspective on that.
Yeah, so coming from Europe, I feel the pain of regulation, but I also understand the need for regulation, because we need regulation to force us in the right direction and also force players to start to act. And I think typically Europe is more focused on the stick and the US is more focused on the carrot, and each has its place. Because the IRA, the act here, is really driving investments. It's actually triggering European companies to move here and start developing their green technologies here. So it works, the carrot. But at the same time, Europe is ahead on the stick. We already have regulation that forces companies to include recycled plastic in their products. The US is starting on that road, which is, from my perspective, great. But I wish that would step up, because the stick is also necessary to get parties to act.
And I think that's where the fiduciary duty and linking sustainability comes in.
Yeah, this has always been a case of, you know, we get the future we want with a combination of good government policy and incentives and business innovation and investment.
Yeah.
And when you're creating new markets and new technologies, those things are both required. So the cheap solar we have today that is fantastic technology, that's partially because of German feed-in tariffs, really socializing the cost of very expensive early solar across the German grid. So we owe a debt to the German people and the German taxpayers and electricity buyers for that. And then it was industrial policy in China that further turbocharged solar. So it has been government intervention into these markets. If you take something like H2 green steel that has been referred to, that's in super high carbon tax Sweden. It's not a coincidence.
Yeah.
So there are policy signals. So if you're a government and you want investment, you need long, loud, legal policy mechanisms, and there can be all sorts of different ways of doing it. You know, you can have incentives, you can have carbon pricing, you can have a combination of those, you can have regulation. But you realize that this is actually going to build the economy of the future. And the responsible businesses, responsible investors welcome well-designed policy. Yeah. You know, we're not worried whether that's really, really strong carbon prices would be a gift to the world for us to do that. And otherwise, some of these things. I'll take one example. Actually, is we own an airline. You know, we're exposed to the real economy. You know, and so we've been looking at sustainable aviation fuel. We've made multiple investments into sustainable aviation fuel. It's 5 or 6 times more expensive today. So we need to get economies of scale, and it will still probably be more expensive than jet fuel, even in 30 years' time. Yeah. And so you can see mandates. Singapore government's put a mandate in place. Europe's put a mandate in place. The UK has put a strong, you know, they basically have got, I think it's something like $6,000 a ton equivalent for if you miss the target, and it's 2% next year, it's 10% by 2030 for SAF. So if you want to be a leader in SAF production, You do things, I don't often say you do things like the UK, but you do things like that. I'm not being prescriptive on particular types, but you have the longer and louder and more legal your policy is, the more investment dollars will flow into the new technologies and the new businesses.
So you agree
Could I
with
mention
that,
something on policy? I mean, I think the carbon border adjustment mechanism is something to watch. I think this is a really good way to integrate carbon pricing into trade policy. And I think it's really the direction of travel that is the most likely to succeed in terms of carbon pricing. So, you know, this does reflect the era of deglobalization and rising protectionism that we're in, you know, especially around climate issues. Because I think, you know, governments have their first duty is to protect their citizens. And governments are increasingly realizing that the market itself is not solving this problem. And so, you know, we are anticipating a lot more government intervention and a lot more government leadership on the climate crisis, because the market is going way too slowly and is obsessed with an incrementalist solution set for this transition. And so the physical climate risk is manifesting way quicker than most people thought. The market transition risk is going way slower than most people thought. And so, but governments are not stupid. They know that their populations are under threat. There's reshoring of supply chains. There's reshoring of the issues around critical minerals. And that is because they know they need to fundamentally protect their citizens. So this is embedded into national security and policy. David Lammy, the new Foreign Secretary back in the UK, gave an amazing speech last week on the integration of climate and nature into foreign policy. I would urge you all to watch that speech, because that is the direction of travel. This is no longer just a nice to have on the side. This is a fundamental need to protect your citizens. Look out for more government regulation.
Well, I think we're at time. The vaudeville, you know, hook's going to come on stage, but I'm going to take the liberty of, in 10 seconds or less, just tell me what you're most excited about. Is there a product, a tool, an innovation? What's giving you momentum and hope right now? And just really quickly down the line, start with you, Steve.
There are, finally, entrepreneurs are not just obsessed with internet apps to get students pizza faster or something. There's so many entrepreneurs around developing brilliant solutions and we with the right policy and getting capital flow, then we can create a fantastic future where we end global warming and reverse the decline in nature and lift everybody out of poverty. So we can get it done with just those two levers.
Fantastic. JACOMIJN.
I think there are promising signs of shoots of new technology that we can see as scalable, and I recognize that my banking peers are also stepping up to try and do that banking as unusual stuff. So that keeps me hopeful.
Wonderful. Colin?
I would just say that the fact that the nature agenda has finally entered center stage with regards to the climate debate, including the ocean dimension of that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. I hope you have a wonderful lunch. We're ending on a high note, I think. Momentum moving forward. And
Thank you.
Thank you all.